So we're continuing along our path of examining into SQL Server analysis services capabilities. We started out in the last two videos. The first video in this section was about where we've been. We've been traveling quite a long road, and so we went back and just did a quick review of the other 7 videos in this iLab, so we sort of know where it is in our roadmap that we are at the present time. And then we looked at cubes, and we took a look at why we need cubes, how useful they're going to be, what their role is, and a little bit about constructing them. In the beginning of this video part of the series, we're going to talk about a deeper dive into SSAS. Specifically, we're going to see that we looked at in the prior video the fact that SSAS is really a database, but not a relational database, but it's in fact a collection of predefined cubes, and that each cube has an associated data source view. That means basically there's a link to a data source that creates a view, and the view is, in essence, you can think of as a layer between your data source and SSAS that sort of protects against changes. And now we're ready to talk about constructing the cube itself, and we're going to do this in a series of 3 videos. This one is currently the one you're watching. We're going to identify a data source, and we're going to develop a data source view from that data source. We're going to use a cube wizard to actually define a cube. We're also going to do enough to where we can browse a cube itself and see what the results of our handiwork are going to be. And we're going to use BIDS, that's the Business Intelligence Development Studio that we used a little bit when we were talking about SSIS to do all of this. And in this video, what we're going to cover is several things. One of the things we're going to actually use as our data source is we're going to pull it out from the AdventureWorks DW relational database. But you actually can use anything as a data source that has that OLE connector available for it. It can be an Oracle database, it can be an Access database, it can be a text file as well. So there's a number of different options that you have. So we're just going to use one of them. So keep that in mind. The data source view we're going to be constructing actually holds the metadata about your data source and allows SSAS to sort of pull it out and pull out the right data in the right manner and put it in the cube appropriately. We're also going to do something called a name calculation, just as an illustration of some of the capabilities this has. And that's not a difficult thing. It's just a matter of combining a couple of tables or doing some logic in whatever language your data source provides. And since we're plugging into a SQL Server database in our AdventureWorks DW, we're going to be using T-SQL to do that. And then we're going to look at, it also gives you the ability to look at the profile. And you can look at some of the columns or some of the dimensions in there in terms of what, and construct some fairly straightforward charts, so you can begin looking at your data at this early date. And then finally, we're going to conclude with the being able to change the table names inside our view so that they're a little bit more friendly when our users begin actually using our cube as part of their activities. So let's get started, and we'll start out by opening BIDS. So I have brought up the Business Intelligence Development Studio, and what we're going to do is create a new project. So I'm going to go over to File. I'm going to open up do New, and I want a new project. And I'm going to put it in. I'm going to do an analysis services project. I'm going to change the name to, let's just call this BIM 500 BI for the name. I'm going to change the directory I'm storing it in, so it's a little easier to get to if I ever need it. And I've actually created a directory called BIDS project, so I'll use that one. Yes, if you look down below here, the project was created successfully. and it has now a solution. Under the solution, it gives me the following, and I'm actually going to, in a way, sort of go down this list to some extent. I'm going to define a data source. We're going to create a data source view, and then we're going to do cubes and take a look at dimensions and as well. And in this, so I go to right-click on data sources and create a new data source, and up comes the data source wizard. So I do click on next. I've got a couple in here that I've already defined in prior activities, but let's go ahead and delete those. So I'll show you how to do them from a new standpoint. I'm going to create a new data source here. It comes up, it wants the server name, as it has asked me before in the past when we were doing the SSAS. And I'm going to put in my the server name that I have on my machine here. I'm going to use Windows authentication to connect, and then now I need to select. So I'm connecting to the SQL Server itself. Now I need to identify a database that I want to select as a source. Menu, I see that I have AdventureWorks and a number of other things here. I'm going to select the AdventureWorks DW database, and I can test my connection, and it was successful, so that's a good sign, and I can say OK. So I've defined a connection to within this SQL Server instance, and it gives me, I'm connecting to my AdventureWorks DW 2008 R2, and go to do the next. And it's asking me for what's called impersonation information, and I want to, it gives me several options here. There are some specific differences about these. It's not important right now that you learn specifically. I'm going to just use a Windows, my Windows username that I signed on my machine with for that account. And do next. And it provides a connection string. Okay, I'm going to remove the spaces from this. From the data source name, and finish. So now I've created a data source, and I'm ready to move on to a data source view. Remember, a data source view takes the data from your data source, and but it protects you. It's like a layer here, so any changes are not going to be carried into your original data source. I right-click on it. I need a new data source view, and up comes the data source view wizard. Click next. So this is the data source we just created. In the prior steps, and so I'm ready to use it. I'm going to click next, and now it brings up all my tables and views that are inside AdventureWorks DW, the data warehouse that I'm connected to. Here are all the DIM tables that we talked about in earlier videos. I scroll down, and there are fact tables there as well. So the way to do this is select the fact table you're interested in. It turns out one that's a good one is fact internet sales. This is the fact table that contains all the various measures that relate to the internet sales for this bicycle company. So we'll just move that over. It brings it across, and then I can add all the related tables. Those are the tables that typically are dimension tables for the most part, and sometimes a fact table can also be a dimension table. So if I add all of those, it brings those across, and you notice I have reason, which is a fact table, but it also can be a dimension table in here, and I'll keep that. But just remember, keep in mind that these are all in function, at least dimension tables that we're going to be slicing and dicing on based on the measures inside our internet sales fact table. Okay, if I do next, It brings up the this particular screen. It wants me to do a name. I'm going to again take out the blanks in this, and I'll call it just add BIAM 500 to the end of it here, and finish. And brings up a very nice diagram. If you take a look at it, again, this looks a lot like a star schema. Here's our fact table in the middle, and here are the various dimension tables around it. So this is a schematic that of our view, though. It is not, you know, the actual table itself. This is just tables themselves. This is just the view of that we're creating. So now I have in my data source view schematically represented here, and this is a good spot to polish it a little bit for my users. Most users are not going to know what DIMs are or facts are, or care for that matter. So to minimize confusion when they see the table names, you can go in and you can put in friendlier table names. You just simply select a particular table, and then when you hit F4, it brings up the properties of that particular table, and here you see that there's a friendly name that that you can use and change. So I'll go in and I'll just delete the dim part and just call it simply product. And you notice it changes it up here in the display. The actual name in the system itself is still dim product, but when anybody uses it, it will use a friendly name. I'll pause the video and go in and change all of these to eliminate the fact and the dim in them. One of the things you can do at this particular spot, as well, in other places as well, is you can create new columns by taking various combinations of the columns in a table, and because we're connected to a SQL Server database, we'd have to use T-SQL. If we were to be connected to another data source, we'd have to use whatever language that was available in that particular data source. So as an example, so if I want to do a calculated column, it's a pretty easy thing to do. If let's take as an example, I have a customer table here, and I've got first name and last name, and maybe I want to concatenate the two. So all I do is just do a right click, new name calculation. I'm going to call this full name. This is pretty standard thing you can do. It's a pretty easy T-SQL statement here, and the do a plus to concatenate it. I'm going to put a space there and a plus, and then last name. And you know, it has to be T-SQL because I'm operating on a SQL Server database, and if I was operating on Oracle or Access, I'd have to use the corresponding languages. But anything you can do with T-SQL, if you're operating on a SQL Server database, you can do in this expression here, case statements or whatever else you'd like to be able to do this. And so I do an OK, and it gives me a full name down here and a little calculator beside that, just to see, to make sure I did what I wanted to do. I could do explore data. It gives me the first 5,000 rows of this particular table, this customer table. And if I come and go all the way across to the end of it, I see that full name has everything I want it to do. And if you look up at the top here, there's some things I can do in terms of doing pivot charts, pivot tables on this table. But I can also do some quick sort of exploration of my data. If I click on chart, there is some things that they already sort of give you here that they think you might be interested in, and like number of cars owned. You can see that typically the most frequently occurring is 2. French occupation, Spanish occupation, none of that sort of too much of an interest to me at this particular stage. So I can go in, and I'm not interested in some of this. I can select and click on this, and it tells me, if I scroll down, there it will give me the things that I might be interested in. I can turn off the ones that I'm not interested in. So I'm not interested in French education, French occupation, and but I am interested in, say, perhaps gender that is, and maybe whether they own a house or not, maybe their marital status as well. Just take a look at some of the demographics down below. Number of cars owned, I'll leave there. Number of children at home, might be interested in that, for since we're talking about bicycles. Spanish occupation, not interested. And so I can say that, that those are the ones that I would be interested in doing. And when I click off of that, it shows me, so I can take a look at it. You can see I have considerably more males and married people than single people. A lot of people have no children home that are buying my bicycles, and all the way out to 5. So that's sort of interesting. The gender here is more female, which is surprising, than male. The homeowner flag is 0 versus 1, so I have a lot more homeowners here. And number of cars owned, which I was looking at before. So I can begin getting a sort of a feel. I can do that with other tables as well, and develop charts, do print screens, or print this out, however it is I want to sort of save it, give me an idea what I might want to do in the future in terms of future analyses. Or in terms of just exploring the data itself. Now, just remember, this is just on the first 5,000 rows. So there, if there may be something that in terms of the way the data is structured, it's not a random sample, but it does give me some insight into what's going on. Now, that means that we're coming to the end of this particular video. What we've done is we've defined a data source. We've used that data source to create a data view for internet sales, and we went in and sort of polished up the view a bit in terms of the names that we were using, and then we also looked at, we did a calculated field or calculated column, and then we wound up by doing some sort of a brief overview of what some of our data might look like. In the next video, we're going to talk about defining a cube on top of this data source.